My name is Jonathan DeLeon, and I'm the Business Development Manager at Focus First. And I am so excited to be able to welcome you to this first video of the Pricing Mastery series. This video series is all about teaching you tips, skills, and understanding of pricing so that you can be a pricing master. In this first episode, we are going to go over the price then position process of competitive pricing that is the backbone of Focus First's unique pricing method that no one else matches. So let's jump into it and go step by step by pricing the actual home. The price then position method is really the key process for you to do a competitive market analysis and have confidence in your pricing. It's the backbone of Focus First's pricing ideal, and it's very easy to follow as well as repeat. So let's go through it step by step and then jump into the program to actually show you how in action. So the comparative versus competitive method. Most pricing software uses the comparative method. So why is this different and why is this better? Well, if you look at the comparative method, on the standard kind of pricing model, you look at recent solds, you use that to find a price per square foot, you choose 3 like properties, and then you kind of adjust up or down based on features and condition and based on your experience in the market. And then from there, you make an estimate, or really, euphemism for a guess at the price. Now, this has been around since God knows when, but it needs to be innovated. It needs to be better because it's missing some key components. It's missing things that need to be incorporated. Things that are figured in when you do a competitive model. So for the competitive side, you look at recent sold, you find the value trend line, which is different than price per square foot, and I'll tell you why a little bit later, which gives you a competitive range. Then you use that to position and account for timing, odds of selling, and market momentum, and all that together finds the market value. Now again, I said earlier that the comparative method is missing something. What is it really missing? It's missing a lot of common sense free market ideals. The reason why is it relies solely on past sold information. It doesn't factor in supply and demand, which everyone at this point in their life has gone through an economics course and knows supply and demand matters when it comes to price. It bases completely on price per square foot, and really it gives you a guess on price or on value, but without being able to factor in market conditions, you're still just guessing. Now on the competitive side, we still use sold data, but we also look at current competition, market timing, momentum, and trends to bring in future competition and be able to really predict the customer experience, which allows us then to really factor in supply and demand of the moment and of a couple months down the road. We use a value trend line to find a competitive price range, and then we position competitively because your buyers will be looking at more homes than just yours. This altogether gives us market value in an accurate and repeatable way that the comparative model really just doesn't. So, how does this work? It works by first finding the historical value of a home, then using the current and future supply and demand, as well as the area and market trends, to correctly position that home for sale and then find market value. Basically, putting this all in one simple sentence, we find the price that buyers are willing to pay for that home. That sounds kind of common sense and kind of like a duh moment, right? If you're not bringing in the competition and you're not positioning yourself well with the momentum, with the trends, and with these ideals of basic economics, you're missing out. And that's why the competitive market analysis is such a powerful tool and such a game changer and a new standard for real estate pricing. So here's the competitive market analysis process lined up 1 to 8. Number 1, you got to know the property. You got to understand the home and where it is and what defines it in a buyer's eyes in the basics of what makes that house itself. Number 2, you got to know the area. This can be from looking overhead on a Google map to understand the layout of the lot, and also you want to know the neighborhood or even the surrounding area around the neighborhood or the comparable locale, whether it be an area of a city or a city itself. You want to look at that to be able to find the trends and to be able to really understand what's going on in that local market. Then you want to find the value range. Now this value range is based on historical sales. This is the value of that home when you look at the bank or an appraisal. But that's not where you stop. You then use that to figure out a competitive price range or the range of buyers that will see your listing when they're looking for a property. Now I'll show you an example, but this is kind of common sense because if you list your price at 175 or 175,000, buyers that are looking for 200,000, they're not going to search only $200,000 houses. They're going to look 200,000 and below. If someone's searching for, in the price range of 165,000, they'll bump up to see what's above them because they might be able to squeeze a little bit extra funds. So that competitive price range is from your buyer's perspective. And when we look at that, now we're looking at the competition that the same buyers that could buy our house are also looking at other listings at the same time. We're going to take that, find another search, look at the homes that we're competing against, and we want to position to have a competitive advantage. We want to be one of those homes that when people see it, we have more value than the other homes that they see. That way they want our house. Now we're going to factor in timing, odds, and market momentum to be able to understand whether we have a ton of buyers about to come to the market or we're fighting for those last couple buyers right now because we're about to hit the slow season in our neighborhood. Then we're going to find the market value after bringing all those together to find that sweet spot of position where we're going to sell for the most value with the least amount of headaches. Then put all this together in one dynamic report so that your customers can see it, follow this thought process with you, and they can arrive at the price together with you versus you having to just preach to the choir. So let me go over each of these steps really quickly. Number one, area patterns. This is about predicting the customer experience. This is about knowing the area. Now this portion of the software, we want to make sure we address key customer questions. So the first graph, the odds of selling, addresses the key customer question of what are the chances that my house sells? Most sellers are intuitively smart enough to know that not every home that goes out there on the listing actually does sell. So they want to know what's my chance that I do sell because I want to be able to plan ahead and move on to my next home. They also want to know how long should it take for their home to sell. And that's what the time to sell graph shows them. They also want to know when is the most opportune time for my home to sell. If you didn't know this, a lot of markets, and especially a lot of neighborhoods, are very seasonal. And they're not always just during the summer. Some can be hot during the winter, some can be hot during the summer, some can be spring and fall. Every neighborhood is different, so being able to answer that question with real information in a visual way that's easy to understand is super powerful. Now, this is all about knowing the area to predict the customer experience and be able to answer those key questions, but we will see these graphs again when we get to that positioning step at the end. When we come to pricing, our goal is to find the value range and then a competitive price range. We do this mostly by finding all this information on a scattergram. It allows us to see all the pricing factors on one graph. We're going to find a correlation with a value trend line. We're going to find the value range, which is kind of the range that we think the home should be priced around. But we're going to find the competitive price range, which is a wider swath of where buyers will be looking. And again, I'm going to go over this very quickly now, but we're going to do this step by step in the software so that you can actually see it in action. After that, we're going to then search with a competitive price range. We're going to start with our starting value, and we're going to just start seeing how we stack up. Should I go a little higher? Should I go a little lower? Where do I still have competitive advantage? And we're going to show you this using quadrants to really show the understanding of where you have an advantage, where you have a disadvantage, where you kind of tie. And then we're going to bring in those market timing and conditions to really hone in on where we need to be in this competitive advantage window to be in the best spot for your sellers. And if we ever have a tie, we're going to go over the concept of bridges. Once we're done with that, we're going to build a report. We're going to set the goal early when presenting. We're going to explain the graphs, deflect all of our expertise to the graphs, and then ask some simple questions. So I'm really excited to be able to show you all this, run through this step by step. So let's go ahead and go through it all together. Now, before we jump into the program, let's just talk about the property. Okay, step one is to know the property. In this case, we're going to use the example property of 1126 South Tyler Avenue, which is located in Loveland, Colorado. It is in a well-defined neighborhood, which means we're going to use a standard search, which is a different video. We have the standard search in tutorials, and we have the advanced searching in episode 2 of Pricing Mastery. But in this case, we're going to use that standard search for a well-defined neighborhood, which in this case is Thompson Valley. Now, the one thing we're going to pull off the MLS sheet here is we're going to make sure we look at this, the total square footage. because we're going to base a lot of our calculations today on total square footage. So looking here is about 1,088, or we're just going to round up to 1,100 for ease. So that being said, let's go ahead now and jump into the program and go step by step through each of these processes, picking up on knowing the area to predict the customer experience. When you open the software, the first thing you're going to see is this dialog box. Make sure you click Enable Macros. The software itself uses Microsoft Excel macros in order to do a lot of the calculations that we want it to do. So that being said, I said earlier that this home fell into a standard searching criteria, which I go over in the standard MLS search tutorial video. But just so you know, I did my search already, searching by that neighborhood, the same property type, the last 2 years of all status activity, and then exported that file. So now I'm going to load it into the software by clicking Start Here. Select my MLS area, and then click my export file, which opens up this dialog box asking me what the neighborhood or subdivision name is, which is Thompson Valley, and then the sub area, or the city in this case, is Loveland. I'm going to click Done, which will go ahead and run the program for me to create a couple graphs without me having to do anything. The first one that opens here once it finishes is going to be our odds of selling. This graph, as you can see, shows us the odds of selling based on the last 12 months, the current year, and the year prior. Now again, you can see that this is a little bit of older data, but I wanted to show you this example because it's a very easy to run through option. Obviously, the numbers will always fluctuate based on the year and the locale. So you can see here, 76% odds of selling is actually really high. Obviously, the odds are in our favor, but in many cases, the average odds of selling you'll see for a citywide can be somewhere in the 40 to 50% range. So when you see something like this, 76% odds of selling, that is through the roof, astronomical high. The average time to sell here, as you can see when it opens, shows us that the average days before close is 66. The average close price is 170,000. One other thing to note on this graph, we can see very easily that there's not a lot going past this 100-day point. So we can pretty well plan ahead that within 3 months this home should close. Going to the buying pattern, we can see here that the hot months, or the months of most activity, fall between April and August. And this search was actually done assuming here, thinking like from the perspective of we are pricing this in March. So if you think about this, this is when it closed. So if you go back to the time to sell, 66 days the average, probably the high side being 90. The fact that we're in March means we're going to be hitting right into that pattern, which is going to be awesome. Now, moving into the pricing, we're going to look for that historical value. So the program automatically creates a standard or default scattergram for us, which if I navigate to it, you can see right here is pretty clean cut. Now, in many cases, this one might not be sufficient. In this case, it kind of is. So guess what? We're going to go ahead and run with this. Looking at our total square footage, which is the graph here in the bottom, and going back to our example, which is 1,100 square feet, we can bring our mouse up and assume we're going to be right around this 170,000. Now, that being said, you see the dots are above it. We could go then and look at the MLS sheets, compare our home to these properties to see how far above the line should we go, or are we going to be right on the line. That being said, I'm going to assume we're probably going to be in the 175 to 180,000 range, which would be in between the middle here, and that's going to be our value range. Now that being said, even though our value range might be 175 to 180,000, most buyers are not going to be searching for that price range. They're going to look probably from the 150 to 200,000 range when they're looking in their searches, whether it be on Zillow, Realtor.com, or through their own agent. So now that we have our value range found pretty easily and pretty quickly here, probably gonna be 175 to 180,000, maybe a little higher depending on how the market's going because we're obviously in a hot time, maybe even higher. But we're going to look at a search for 150 to 190,000, 150 to 200,000, sorry, and we're going to do that search now and then go into positioning. So jumping back to our slideshow here, we are going to go over an idea that we call the comparable locale. So the comparable locale is, in this case, can be Southwest Loveland. Now you're the agent, so you're going to have the expertise in your area. In many cases, you're not going to do the whole city because you know that there's certain areas of the city that kind of group together, whether it be by age, current like momentum of people wanting to move there, business development, or even look and feel. So in this case, we're going to do Southwest Loveland. Now, in some cases, when you do a larger search like this, what you're going to use is major roads as a defining line. So let me show you really quickly here. This is a map of Loveland. You can see this box here is what we're searching in, which is basically divided by this road here called 34 and this road, which is cut off a little bit, called 287. This quadrant is what we're going to be pricing against because each of these quadrants have a very unique look and feel to them. So doing that, I then did my search using that price range of 150 to 200,000 in Southwest Loveland. After I did that search, I exported it, and now I'm going to import it to this software. I'm going to click this button here. It says Upload POS or Positioning Data. It's going to open up the same dialog box as before, asking me what MLS I'm using. Now, I could always click this box here, which I'm going to go ahead and do, which will lock that choice in because I'm only pricing in this area. I recommend that for you if you're only going to be pricing in one MLS area, but you could do it unlocked where it asks you every time if you're pricing multiple MLSs. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to open up the option here. I'm going to open up my export file. Now this time when it opens up my dialog box, I'm going to make sure that I put in the subdivision area, the price range. Obviously, since we're going to be positioning against the price range, I want to make sure that it's very clear on the graphs that that's what we're using. And we're not just looking all Loveland again, this is now Southwest Loveland. So I'm going to click Done and let the program go ahead and run, which will bring in that positioning or that market information. Okay, so now that's automatically brought into the program, and a couple of graphs are made for us automatically. The first one I want to show you here is the Pond 2.0. What this gives us is market momentum. You can very easily see right here in the middle of this graph that it says it favors sellers. That's fantastic. Now, but why is it favoring sellers? Where can we get that information from? Using a numerical analysis, we can see here that there's 36 projected homes to be sold in the next 90 days. This is bringing in a new behind-the-scenes buying pattern, time to sell, odds of selling, and the current demand, as well as what's available in the market to get this number. We can see here that there's 12 homes under contract, one that's for sale is not under contract, and one that we call is stagnant. It means it's for sale, but it's really exceeded that average days on the market. So now it's really at the risk of not selling because it's been sitting there for too long. So what that means though, is that there's going to be 24 new projected sales because there's 36 that are expected to happen. And right now there's 12 that are flowing, one that are showing, one that's stagnant, which we're going to go ahead and remove that, which means that there's still 24 new sales that need to come in the next 90 days. That is a huge movement in our favor. You can imagine here, if you get on the market, you're probably going to have a bidding war. Now that being said, we want to make sure we price correctly and let the market move us up because when it gets to appraisal, you still have to be in the right historical value. So using our historical value range, we're going to be looking from 170 to 180,000. Let's jump to the other graph, which is the positioning scattergram. This positioning scattergram really shows us the active properties, those that are for sale and under contract, in that area. Now, you can see here the two properties that were for sale and all the ones that are under contract. Now, we were down here at the 1,100 square feet, which is a little bit off the map here, but we're going to go ahead and just run with the 1,200 and go ahead and put in our property and look at where we kind of value ourselves in this market. So, going back to our active data sheet, which we can click either through the tabs down here or in the positioning, what we're going to do is add a user property. By adding this user property, we're going to go ahead and put in 1126 Tyler, and we're going to say subject property. Now this is going to allow us to have a subject property in the data sheet, which will give us more controls in our positioning scattergram. That being said, in this user property, I could add coming soon if an agent happened to speak up at a meeting saying we have a coming soon property, or if I saw any for sale by owners that are either for sale or under contract, I can add them here as well. In this case, I'm just going to add Tyler as a subject property. And I'm going to, in the data sheet, add the total square footage of 1,100 and put one of our estimate prices, let's say of 180,000 on the high end, just starting out in the list price. Now what I'm going to do is click on this Create Graph Options button. And what I'm going to do is add this thing here that says Show Positioning Quadrants. Okay. what that's going to do is on the graph we're going to see very clear lines showing the positioning quadrant. So create this, and I'm going to keep both so I can show you the difference. Awesome. So this here is our Tyler property. And you can see that it's on this 180,000, and then it draws a quadrant line. Now, in this case, we got to think from a buyer's perspective. What is the real value of our home versus another home? So for 180,000, they could buy our house for 1,100 square feet, or they could buy this one that's 1,500 square feet. Now, obviously, I would recommend you go to the MLS data sheets, check out the differences between the two. You might be really upgraded, while this other property might be old and outdated and needs some TLC. But we're not going to do that right now, just for this example. But we're going to look at and say, okay, what if we're similar as far as conditions and special features go? Well, what that means is the other home has a higher value. Now, in this case, the market is so much in our favor, we could probably be okay being a tie because there's going to be more than one buyer out there. But in many cases, we want to make sure we're still positioning ourselves to win, to have the most value. And there's not really a lot of risk in this case because the truth is, when you have the most value, you're not going to just attract one buyer. When there's a lot of buyers out there and there's a lot of momentum for you, you're going to attract multiple, which in a hot market will allow you to sell for more, but still be at the list price, which is one of those kind of key components that we love when we get in bidding wars of saying, we will absolutely take an offer above, but waive appraisal down to list price as the cap, but because we know we're in that value range. So in this case, do we have competitive advantage? Yes or no? Maybe, maybe not, but in many cases we might have a competitive disadvantage. So we want to make sure we always position to have competitive advantage. So we're going to go ahead and look at this again, moving this property down to 175,000. So going back to positioning, I'm just going to change this, 175,000, create it again. Again, keeping both just so you can see that. And now we have our property positioned here. Now, why am I saying that we now have a competitive advantage? Or at least we don't have a competitive disadvantage. In this case, in this top right quadrant, what this means is there's more square footage and it costs more. That kind of makes sense. Down here to the right would be that there's more square footage and it costs less. That usually be a disadvantage for us. Now, in this case, we're on the edge of the graph, but if you can kind of extrapolate the idea of the other quadrants here, if we're up and to the left of the quadrant intersection or our subject property, that means we're paying more money for less square footage. That's less value. So that means we'd be beating that quadrant. Down the bottom left, it's less price, less square footage, which also kind of makes sense and puts us in a tie. In this case, we're putting ourselves in a beautiful tie, maybe on value, but because we have such a positive market, we are no longer at a competitive disadvantage. And since we're at a tie, we then factor in timing, odds, and momentum. So going to the pond, you can see that the momentum's in our favor. That's positive. Going back to our patterns, which is still in that pricing information, our neighborhood odds of selling, positive. And again, like I said, we priced this in March using both the time to sell and the buying pattern. You can see that's another positive. What that gives us is a net advantage in this market. So this is a time where we would use this to position the home for sale at 175,000 and get ready for multiple offers. You could do a listing launch here if you want to really drive that bidding war into overdrive. Now, when it comes to printing these graphs, what we probably would do is just click this print graph button and make sure we print the ones we want to. So you can see that these titles here match the tabs in the bottom. So we're probably going to print the odds, the time to sell, the buying pattern, the most recent positioning gram, the pricing scattergram, and the pond. Now you could print the MLS data sheets to be able to show all this information if you want to. Obviously you're going to print the MLS sheets elsewhere, but we're going to go ahead and print these things, click OK, and then print them. Now, when you go to show this to your customer, you're going to take them through the exact same thought process we did. Here's your MLS sheet in your home. Here's your area patterns. Here's the value range that we're looking at from historical value. But now let's look at what the buyer's looking at. And here is where you have a situation where you're not at a competitive disadvantage, and now we can position your home really well. We're probably going to get a lot of sales here. The other thing about this in general is we love the idea of being on a bridge. So a bridge is a common value that buyers will search for. 200,000, 150,000 is a common value. 175,000 is also a common value. You'll see some people pricing a home when they'll be 175,999 or 176,000 and $313. It's foolishness. It's unnecessary because number one, if someone's searching for 175,000 and lower, guess what? They just missed your property because you put $300 extra on it. It's not worth it. On top of that, that extra value doesn't actually equate to extra value in contracts in many cases, because in this case, we're looking for multiple offers, we're looking for a higher bump because the market dictates it and because that's where the best value is for the properties available. You can see there's not very many properties available right now. Well, if we're nickel and diming for $300 extra, does that mean that an offer is going to come in with $300 extra? No, of course not. Because when buyers are out there looking, they don't get an approval letter showing they're approved for $180,312. Their approval letter will say $180,000. So we got to think a little bit more on the buyer side and what they actually are working with to get the best result from them. So we're going to print this, present this to the customers, show this to them, and then we're going to deflect the graphs. When we show them the scattergram, we're going to ask them, can you show me on the graph where the graph says your home should be priced? If you go from here to here, the graph says 170,000. That's right, that's what the graph says. That being said, you have some upgrades and fixings. I think we're going to be a little bit higher, more in the 175 or 180 range, but I want to look at this and see what's going to get the most value. Would that be okay with you? Absolutely. On the next graph, when you show them the positioning scattergram here, make sure that they understand and say, would you agree that your home would sell best for market value before you show them this graph? And they're going to say, well, what's market value? They're going to say, well, according to this graph, this shows that 175,000 is going to put us in the best spot to get the best impression on all the buyers out there's minds. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that there's no competitive disadvantage here? Yes. Again, the whole point here is deflect to the graphs, ask them the questions, and then let the graphs make the pricing understanding for you. So using this, when you present it, you now have a very visual, very easy to understand process, very easy to understand mindset, be able to predict the customer experience, and be able to really position well. So I want to make very clear here that positioning is the main key component of market value. So when we go to position, we're going to look at the position to win. Now I said competitive advantage earlier, and in that example, we actually went to a competitive tie. But it's a combination of both the actual position and then the market trends and momentum. That combination will get you in a position where you're in a position to win and not necessarily in a position of just tie or lose. Now, the other thing on that is we made sure to set the goal for that position, right? We were in a tie spot, but we knew that it was a busy market. And so in that case, we knew that we were setting the goal to get a multiple offer or bidding war situation. Now let me show you one quick example of a different situation when it's not quite as hot a market or not quite as good as far as signals go. Okay, so this home is a little bit different example. It's a little bit more current and it's a little bit more up to date, but it's also in a market not as hot. So this home was in an area called Wellington, and when you look at the actual patterns for the neighborhood, they look pretty good. 80% odds of selling, time to sell average at 65 days, and a buying pattern here. And you can see that I was pricing this in April, which means we're probably right at the end of this buying pattern, maybe hitting the dead zone. But so far, we're kind of okay when it comes to the odds. So the odds are good. The buying pattern, a little iffy. When I looked at pricing and looked for the historical value on this home is at about 3,300 square foot, which is going to put it somewhere in between the range of probably 80. Okay, so then I looked at positioning it against 350 to 400,000. And this is where things changed. So jumping to the positioning here, you can first look at the market momentum. This favors buyers heavily. There's 10 projected homes to sell in the next 3 months, and there's 10 that are currently under contract. That literally is the worst looking bond you can have because it's predicting no new sales. Doesn't mean it can't sell, doesn't mean that it can't break the pattern, but it's not exactly a odds in your favor situation. So I went to the positioning scattergram here. We were looking at this 3,300 square footage, and we were looking at 380,000 to start. So I'm going to throw that user property in. And this was on a street called Pettigrew. And let's go ahead and recreate this here with the positioning quadrants. Okay, so opening this up, oh geez, move this guy out of the way just for a second so you can see a little easier, right? We now are looking at positioning ourselves in a competitive situation where we're going to have an advantage. Now, if you look at this home costs less, is less square footage, which means it's probably about a tie. These homes cost way less and are a little bit less square footage as well, so we have to look at what's going on with those. In many cases though, and in this case, we can look at that, and these homes were built at a different time. So sometimes year built can make a huge difference. This is about 10 years older than the home that I'm looking at pricing. So we're going to say we're going to go ahead and still have an advantage over those homes. Now looking along the same line here, we're going to have obviously advantage of this home, but it's under contract. And then some of these other ones for sale. Now, this is where it gets a little bit fun and a little bit interesting on some of these kind of homes as well. All of these here are actually new construction. All of these here are those that are resale. And this home is a resale. So we're really looking at those. So in this case, when we have a bad situation on the pond, we're probably missing the buying pattern, but the odds are good. We don't want to be in a situation where we tie, because we're literally leaving it up to a coin flip whether we sell or not. So this is our main competition right here. So we need to put ourselves in a situation where we're beating that person to give us any kind of chance. So if we look now at the 375,000 range, let's go ahead and bring this property down. Recreate the graph. Now we can see ourselves, move that out of the way, in this spot here. Now obviously compared to this home that's for sale, same price, we have almost 1,000 more square feet. We're clearly going to be a better value to that home. Now we're winning against this guy. This home here is a couple hundred square feet less, and we are lower priced. So we do have more value than them. This is really key to be in a competitive advantage situation when you are having this negative overall market conditions. So if you think about this, is you want to have a net advantage or at least have a net tie. In this case, we want to make sure that we're in a net advantage. So 375,000 here. If you think about the pond as like almost a -1, we beat one home, we lose because the pond is negative. Now we're even. Go back to patterns. The odds are in our favor. It's +1. The buying pattern is kind of on the edge, so it's a little bit positive, negative, I don't know. So if we give that a neutral, we're still in a +1. If it was definitely out of that buying pattern, that would give us -1, we might have to go down a little bit more. Now in this case, I'm going to tell you that what actually happened, because I did sell this home. This actually was my home. We actually looked at this buying pattern and we realized that this was the pattern for 2019. We were looking at selling it in 2020. As you can imagine, things changed in 2020 a little bit, and because of the lockdown, it actually pushed our buying pattern 1 month back, so we landed in it, keeping us in that competitive advantage and allowing us to get that one buyer and thankfully sell our house. This is why it's so powerful though, because if we looked at just the historical data, we would have easily listed around 385 or 390. But looking at positioning, we realized that might be the actual value according to historical information, but looking what's available in the market, and more importantly, looking what's available in buyers, it's not going to be worth that much right now. Supply and demand actually matters. So jumping really quick back to the price and positioning. The price then position slide, I should say. Remember this process and follow it, and it will help you position your home correctly. Know the property, know the area, find that value range, find the competitive price range, position to have an advantage when you combine in the timing, we factor in the timing, odds, and momentum, which will find you that market value. Then put this all together in that order and deflect and defer to the graphs, allowing your customers to arrive at the answer with you. Hopefully this video helped you master the tools and master your pricing. If you want to see more videos like this and additional videos we release, make sure you subscribe to the Focus First YouTube channel. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.